Oh, this just in. We have an on-the-scene live report from Melanie Nash in Burlington.
Thanks, Bob. I am here on the west side of Burlington, Vermont, just outside the forest next to Lake Champlain. A possibly homeless man who locals have reported often meanders in the very well-maintained paths of the forest and is reported to go by the name the Head Shin or the Big Shin, was seen drunkenly walking down the path muttering 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And he kept waving and pointing to a piece of paper with nonsensical symbols on it, muttering that it had his whole system on there and that he looked at it every day and that it was the solution to dharma. He was in a trench coat, which he called his robes, and wearing a sign that said on the front, "Think dimensionally," and on the back, "Optimize the happy." Then he returned to this kind of spastic walking, telling the crowd that he was auto-walking and that they should try auto-thinking so that they could meet Gus. We're not sure who Gus is, possibly an imaginary friend. Everyone assumed at this point that the man was intoxicated, and then he started marching and chanting, "Trump is empty! Obama is empty!" And that's when a real crowd started to gather, assuming it was actually a political rally. People wanted to join in the chant, but were confused as to which side he was on. When someone asked him, he stopped and looked at them and said, "The source, and so are you, and everything is loved into existence in each moment." At which point they assumed this wasn't political after all, but that he was a religious fanatic. But then he asked if anyone had some Kickapoo joy juice, and then said that he had been abducted by aliens who did a lot of anal probing. Yes, Bob, that's when they realized he was delusional and the authorities were called. And then he returned to the counting and walking, only to stop and declare that he had no self, which had a bounciness and connectivity. And then he proceeded to say he could see, hear, and feel while waving his arms and pretending to have a theory. By this point, there was a huge crowd around him who seemed to be enjoying this display. Some were even drawn in, and soon others were walking around chanting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that's when we arrived, Bob. And I tell you, I have never seen anything like it. I think the guy was just some kind of hypnotist. When the police arrived, they came towards him and he said he wanted to wrestle like he did with his TA when he was stoned. And that's when one officer approached him slowly, saying that everything was going to be okay. To which the man said it was more than okay. Everything was enfolded with an expansion and contraction which arose out of and returned to the source. Then he pointed to a garbage can and insisted he could merge with it. The officer said that he wanted the man to get into the car, and then the man, called the Big Shin, pointed to the car and said he had been in one of those, and that it had rolled over and slid under a semi, and that was how he lost his ear. But it wasn't a bad trip. Oh, yes, Bob, he seemed to have both his ears. The officer then asked if there were drugs involved, and the Big Shin said yes, LSD. But then he giggled and confided that no one knew. Well, the police officer assured him that now he knew, and that they needed him to get into the car. The man asked if instead they could go on a motorcycle at 100 miles per hour with no self-driving, or pretend it was an ox and ride backwards. And the officer said, "No." To which the man pretended to ring a bell and then said, "That car is empty." The officer then said that the empty backseat was going to be full in a moment and asked the man if he could see how many fingers he was holding up. The man then approached the officer, looked deeply into his eyes, and in a slow, meaningful way asked the officer, "Who is seeing?" Whereupon the officer disappeared. Vanished. I kid you not, Bob. Then the man, the big shin, pointed quickly and shouted, "Gone!" Well, the entire crowd erupted in applause, assuming this was all part of a magic act. This had all just been a show, and a good one too, Bob, I must say. Well, the big shin, as we'll now call him, turned to the crowd and told them that he had a book on how to do this, but that it was in R&D, and for now everyone could just apply C, C, and E liberally, and they too could return to the source. Then the officer reappeared, but no longer wanted to arrest the man, and instead wanted to ask him more about his source. The officer seemed like a different man, Bob, and told us all to have some compassion and to love deeply and act effectively, which, coming from a cop, is quite something to hear. Then the officer and the man conferred, after which the officer bowed to him. I kid you not, Bob, you simply cannot make this stuff up. And then the big shin turned to the crowd and said, and this is a direct quote, "On the epitaph of civilization will be that subtle emotional sensations that went undetected did them in. But we could do something about that and feel in, with clarity, equanimity, and concentration, noting activity and rest, and also vibration. And by having a complete experience of this, we could find true freedom and fulfilling bliss. And be patient, it takes time, and know that the first bite of emptiness is like biting into an apple. That's right. The taste and texture of the skin is not what's inside. And no matter how long it takes, it's worth the ride. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, if we appreciate, transcend, and in positivity dwell. And in the meantime, be a mensch, and just think of that inside the jewel in the lotus is love." And on that note, he expanded and contracted until he too disappeared. And the crowd, now the audience, just stood there. It was weird, because we were all quite confused, but also happy and felt good from this strange little man at the edge of the woods. And I realize that I'm now talking in rhyme, but I trust, Bob, that this too will pass with time. So this is Melanie Mash signing out from this event. It was odd and bizarre, but we all leave content.